So, our next presenter is a motivational speaker. You know, one of those guys who speaks at high schools and churches. His name's Matt Farley. Now, he's been backstage drinking coffee for about the last 4 hours. So he should be ready to go. Matt, we're ready for you. His speech is called Go For It, and he's used to big crowds, so make him feel comfortable, okay, guys?
All right, how's everyone doing tonight? That was an inappropriate response. So, as you probably just got told, my name is Matt Farley, and I am a motivational speaker. I'm 35 years old, I am thrice divorced, and I live in a van down by the river. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, hey, Matt, I'm going to go out there and get the world by the tail and wrap it around and pull it down and stick it into my pocket. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're going to find out as you go out there that you're not going to amount to jack squat. You're going to wind up eating a steady diet of government cheese when you're living in a van down by the river. Now let's see what we got to work with over here. I can't see real good. All right, young lady, now what do you want to do with your life?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, those cat cut your tongue antics aren't going to get you nothing but a huge cup of jack squat. You're going to be sitting there tongue-tied when you're living in a van down by the river. Now, how about you, young man? What do you want to do with your life? You don't know either. What the heck is up with this audience? I got 3 weeks for you, pal. You better get your act together. Now, one of these days, you're going to go back to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, or wherever you're from. People are going to say, hey, heard you went to Nerd Nite in Anchorage. By golly, did you have a good time? And you're going to say, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. So you're probably asking yourself, hey, man, how can I get back on the right track? And your old buddy Matt's got the solution. And that's it, you gotta get yourself another beer. Put your derriere in that cherriere, and let's get ready to learn about Chris Farley. What do you say? All right. My God. What was that all about? All right. I have a confession to make. My name is not actually Matt Farley. My name is Peter. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I do have a shirt on underneath this, so no, I'm not doing the Chippendale sketch next. So that was the motivational speaker sketch. It was written by Bob Odenkirk, who some of you might know as Saul from Breaking Bad. And it was inspired by a number of people. It was inspired in part by this guy. This is Joel Maturi. He's a former athletic director from the University of Minnesota, but he's also Chris Farley's high school football coach. And he used to give him these pump-up speeches. He'd get down into a football stance and say things like, if you're going to tackle like that, you're going to end up living in a van down by the river. And it was also inspired by this guy. This is the Matt Farley, or Father Matt Farley now. He was one of Chris Farley's college rugby buddies and became a priest after college. Went to Chicago to see Chris when he was performing at Second City when he was first doing that character. Chris, when he saw his friends in the audience, liked to spontaneously rename characters after the friends that he saw there. So it was a big surprise to this guy. He's out in the audience, and he hears, here comes Matt Farley, the motivational speaker, and he kind of sinks down in his chair because he has no idea what's coming up. But he's later said that he is incredibly honored to have that character named after him. Chris once told him he would never change the name of the character, and he considers it a big honor. But the biggest influence on this character, and I say that in more ways than one, is this guy. This is Chris Farley's dad. That's Tom Farley Sr. Tom Farley, he had this habit of like starting out slow and building up to a rage. He'd be like, I thought I told you boys to shovel the walk! I said it's time to go to Mass! So a lot of that character comes from him. Tom Farley married Mary Ann Crosby, and together they had 5 children, of which Chris was smack dab in the middle. And he learned at a very early age that if he was going to get any sort of attention in this large Irish Catholic family of his, he would have to make people laugh. So he learned at a very young age that he would basically do anything for a laugh in order to get attention. Also, conveniently, if he could make his dad laugh, that was a way that he could get out of trouble. So he also used that ability to his advantage. He grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a home of the University of Wisconsin, my alma mater. Go Badgers. He lived in a very, very wealthy part of town. He lived actually just a couple streets down from the governor's mansion. Went to Edgewood High School, private high school, played football there, and then eventually went to Marquette University in Milwaukee. He played rugby at Marquette University because they didn't have a football program. After he graduated from Marquette, he really didn't know what he was going to do with his life, so he just went back to Madison and started working for his dad's business. He had an asphalt contracting business. And if this sounds really familiar to you, this is basically the plot of Tommy Boy. A lot of the movie Tommy Boy was like paralleling Chris Farley's real life story. But unlike Tommy Boy, Chris Farley realized that his dad's business was not where he needed to be. So he decided that he was going to try his hand at some improv. He had done some drama in high school and some drama in college, and he loved being on stage. So he started working at a place called The Arc in Madison. It's no longer there. It's a laundromat now. And then from there, he went down to Chicago, worked for the famed Second City. From there, he went on to Saturday Night Live in New York, and then after that, broke into film. I really just breezed through his rise to stardom because I don't want this presentation to be just a summary of my favorite Chris Farley moments, my favorite SNL sketches, because that's the side of Chris Farley that we are all pretty familiar with. What I want this presentation to be about is the side of Chris Farley that we might not know, the Chris Farley behind the scenes. But to get there, I'm going to start out with what we're all familiar with, and this is his comedic style. And if there's one thing that these clips are meant to convey, it's that Chris Farley was a brilliant physical comedian. I said before that he was an athlete, and he was very strong and he was very agile. He could dance, he could do the worm, he could do cartwheels. He actually once did a backflip in a bar just as a bet. So he was part of the humor of Chris Farley comes from the juxtaposition of this very large man doing all of these incredible agile things. But he also had a really refined comedic sense and a very refined dramatic ability. He was an extremely good actor. And we caught glimpses of this in movies like Tommy Boy, where he's struggling with his relationship with his dad or taking on the burdens of taking over this company. And it's a part of his career that we never really got to see. But there are a lot of film stars out there who really got to know Chris, who say that he could have had a very long and successful career, like this quote from Alec Baldwin illustrates, had his life not been tragically cut so short. All of his co-stars at Saturday Night Live agreed that he was by far and away leagues ahead of all of them. There was nobody who was really competing with Chris Farley on that show because he was just so good. The interesting thing about that, though, is that no one resented him for that. On a show like Saturday Night Live, where everybody is fighting for every second that they can get on screen every single week, there was a lot of competition and a lot of hard feelings between these actors. But nobody felt that way about Chris Farley. Everybody loved working with him, and I think a lot of that has to do with his personality. Deep down, Chris Farley was just a nice, small-town Wisconsin guy. He was not about self-aggrandizement. It was not his goal to go out there and become the biggest comedic star that he could be. Instead, his love was just the love of laughter. He loved laughing and he loved making people laugh. And that sort of attitude was infectious with everybody that he worked with. One of the great things about this, and one of the most endearing parts of his character, in my opinion, is that because he wasn't really about turning himself into this big star, in his heart he was very humble, and he would get super nervous around all these stars and musicians that would come in. He would clam up, he wouldn't be able to speak. It was such a part of his character that they ended up turning it into an SNL sketch called The Chris Farley Show, which if I have some time at the end, I will certainly play you some clips of it because I think it's one of my favorite Chris Farley sketches. But if I don't get a chance, when you go home, look this one up. It's Chris Farley's show with Paul McCartney, and you'll be able to see just how nervous he gets in front of all these stars. Chris Farley was also extremely faithful. He was very Catholic. He went to Mass every single Sunday. If he couldn't make it to Mass because he was filming or something like that, he made sure that there was a priest on set that could give Mass for him. So he also extended that faith, however, into his everyday works. He did lots of charity gigs and regularly refused payment for those. He regularly visited children's hospitals and homeless shelters. And there's a great story about Chris. A year after his death, they held a memorial service for him in New York. It was attended by his family members. It was attended by lots of his friends from film and from Saturday Night Live. And everybody took turns going up on stage and just talking about their favorite Chris Farley memories. After a little bit, this guy got up on stage that nobody knew. He introduced himself as Willie, and he said that he was a homeless man living there in New York. And Willie met Chris Farley at a homeless shelter. Chris came in to volunteer, and after that meeting, Chris Farley came back every single week, and he visited Willie. If Chris couldn't make it because he was filming or something like that, he made sure to call or send Willie a postcard. He took him out to baseball games. He treated him like an equal. And this was a side of Chris that nobody there knew about. He did all of these charitable things, but he never went around bragging about it. He did it because it was the right thing to do, not because it would make his image seem better somehow. When Willie was done talking, he had a hat on his head. He took it off, and he said, "This hat is the last gift that Chris ever gave me, and I really miss him." And that's going to take us to the tragic side of Chris Farley. Because like most comedians, the comedy that he produced stemmed from some sort of wound that he had deep inside. And for Chris Farley, a lot of that came from the insecurities that he had because of his weight. Ever since he was a young kid, he had always struggled with his weight, and it was something that ate at him year after year after year. He had this quote, "Everybody laughs when fatty falls down." He said that all the time. And even though other people tried to tell him otherwise, Chris always got a sense that people were laughing at him and not with him. Once he got to be this big star, he kind of felt that he was trapped in these roles that cast him as this big physical comedian that didn't allow him to explore his dramatic abilities. Because of that insecurity that he had because of his weight, he started doing drugs. He started drinking in high school, and then once he went to college, he started doing things like mushrooms and marijuana, and after that, things got worse and worse. By the time he was at Chicago and New York, he was doing heroin, cocaine, anything that he could get his hands on, Chris was using. So Lorne Michaels, the producer of Saturday Night Live, had been through this same thing before with another famous comedian. John Belushi had also famously killed himself by becoming addicted to drugs. Lorne did not want to go through the same thing again. He said to Chris, "You either get yourself clean or I'm firing you from the show." And Chris did it. He went to a rehab clinic in Alabama, and for 3 years, he was able to keep himself clean, and this, in my opinion, was the height of his career. He was, without a doubt, the biggest star on Saturday Night Live, and this is also when he produced what I think we'll all agree is his finest movie, Tommy Boy. Yeah, don't be afraid to give some love for Tommy Boy. You can give as much love as you want for these movies. Because what ended up happening is after the success of Tommy Boy, Chris Farley was a huge star. And he wanted to take that stardom and launch it into a different direction. He wanted to do movies that could explore his dramatic talents. He wanted to get away from that fatty falls down type of humor. Paramount, however, after the success of Tommy Boy, wanted more of the same. So they kind of contractually forced him to do the movie Black Sheep, which did pretty well in the box office, but took his career in a direction he didn't really want it to go. After Black Sheep, he did Beverly Hills Ninja and then Almost Heroes, both of which cast him in a similar light. He's like a large, oafish, clumsy, moronic guy who's just there getting the cheap laughs. Chris did not like the direction that his career was heading. He didn't like the pressure of being this huge film star. And because of that pressure, he ended up relapsing. And from this point until the end of his life, he was in and out of rehab almost constantly. Another reason why Chris never really got control of his sobriety was that he and his family also had a lot of these issues that they were dealing with together, but nobody really was willing to acknowledge those. All of the men in Chris Farley's family, his father and all of his brothers, had problems with alcoholism. And many of them, including his dad here, had problems with their weight. But acknowledging that Chris had a problem with his weight and that Chris had a problem with his drug use was akin to acknowledging that their father, the figurehead of this family that everybody respected and adored, also had a problem. Nobody was willing to tackle that beast, and because of that, they swept these problems under the rug, and things got worse and worse. On December 15th, Chris went to a party for a friend, and this kickstarted a 4-day bender where Chris went out overeating, drinking, and doing drugs. On the early morning of December 18th, Chris was in his apartment at the John Hancock Center in Chicago. He was there with an escort, and at about 3 a.m., they started arguing about money. As she went to leave, he stood up, he took a couple steps towards her and stumbled and fell to the ground. She went back and checked on him and thought that he was just safely passed out for the night. She stole his watch, wrote him a thank you note, took a couple pictures of his body, and then walked out. The last words that he said to her were, "Don't leave me." Chris Farley died that morning at the age of 33. He died of a drug overdose that was exacerbated by his incredible weight gain towards the end of his life. The last thing I want to discuss is what could have been. What might have happened to Chris Farley's career had he not died so young? Before he passed away, Farley had been recording the dialogue for an animated movie. He took it on kind of as a side project. It wasn't supposed to do that well, but he recorded some of the dialogue before he passed away, and I'm going to play a quick clip from that right now. Hopefully we got the audio. We don't have audio. Why aren't you drinking? Sure, let's do it. So you all look great now that I'm blinded by that light up there. Also, is anybody else cold? Yeah, like I don't know why they set the thermostat to the witch's tit setting. Okay, well, we'll go back to this, I guess, but that was a video clip. This is a storyboard for the movie Shrek. Chris Farley was actually the original voice for Shrek. And he recorded about 80% of the dialogue. They were almost done with the film before he passed away. They had a big debate about whether or not they were going to get somebody to finish the last bit of the dialogue or if they were going to replace the actor entirely. Obviously, they went with Mike Myers. But a lot of people wonder what might have happened if Chris had lived to finish that movie. Nobody really knew that it was going to be the big success that it ended up being. But a lot of people think maybe that was the thing that could have kickstarted his career in another path. The other movie that Chris Farley was slated to star in was a biopic of this guy. This is Fatty Arbuckle, who was a famous silent comedian. And he also had a really tragic story, just like Farley's. Chris saw this movie as maybe an opportunity to combine his comedic talents and his dramatic abilities. And unfortunately, he passed away before this could get finished. None of the studios would greenlight the project because they didn't believe that Chris could stay sober long enough to complete the filming. But a lot of people think if he had just been able to make this movie, maybe that would have been the thing that launched his career in a different direction and maybe helped him to get his sobriety together. The last thing I'm going to do here is read a poem. This is called A Clown's Prayer, and it's a poem that Chris carried with him wherever he went. He kept it in his wallet, and I think it's a really good summary of what he was all about. And it goes like this. As I stumble through this life, help me to create more laughter than tears, dispense more happiness than gloom, spread more cheer than despair. Never let me become so indifferent that I will fail to see the wonders in the eyes of a child or the twinkle in the eyes of the aged. Never let me forget that my total effort is to cheer people, make them happy, and forget momentarily all the unpleasantness in their lives. And in my final moment, may I hear you whisper, when you made my people smile, you made me smile. And with that, we'll take it to questions.
All right, who has a question for Peter? Anybody? Anybody? Over here? Yep.
Yeah, do you remember that one time that you did Matt Foley at Nerd Night?
Yeah, what about it?
And can you do it again?
I probably could once I catch my breath. Might be a little bit.
Anybody else? Anybody else? No questions about Chris Farley? Oh, over here, yes.
What was the moment when you saw him that you realized you loved his performance? What was that one part of his performance that really spoke to you?
Do I have to repeat the question? It was what was the one moment that I remember seeing Chris Farley that it really spoke to me? It's really hard to say because I was watching movies like Tommy Boy since I was a little kid. I couldn't even tell you the first time I saw it. But I will tell you this: growing up as a chubby kid in Wisconsin, Chris Farley was my hero, and just that outrageous style of humor was something that I always tried to emulate. And I remember some very specific moments in my childhood, times where people were bullying me or something, and I was able to make them laugh. And I remember the power that that humor had, and I think that's just one of the reasons why I gravitated towards somebody like Chris Farley, because he had the same kind of issues going on when he was young. He was this kid who was picked on because he was fat, and he turned humor into this shield. So can't give you a specific moment, but I'd say that's probably the reason why I liked his character so much.
Dash?
Are you aware that Chris Farley is a Wisconsinite so lovable that even Minnesotans love him?
I was not aware of that. Obviously Chris Farley has, some extreme ties to Wisconsin. That's why they can sell shirts like this. I also have a shirt that says "I" with Chris Farley's picture, Wisconsin. As I'm assuming you're from Minnesota. Yeah, so I'm sure that Chris Farley would appreciate that.
Oh, one more question back there.
So it's really common for studios to finish off a production if somebody died part the way through, like Philip Seymour Hoffman in one of the last Hunger Games is this thing in. Why was it that he was 80% done and they just ditched it instead of just trying to patch it together or have someone finish it?
That's a good question, and that's a question that I really can't answer because I don't really know what the inner workings were of the executives. I know part of the debate was which direction the character really wanted to go. Chris Farley's Shrek was a lot more like Chris Farley in that he had all these insecurities and he was trying to deal with those insecurities in a very emotional way, whereas Mike Myers' character was more he had these insecurities, but he was also just kind of proud of being the way he was. So it might have been a willingness to take the character in a different direction, but I wasn't sitting in on those meetings, so I really couldn't tell you.
You want to try and see if we can get that to play real quick?
Yeah, do you want me to just go to my last movie clip instead here? Or do you want to, let's see if we can get Shrek to go.
Yeah, let's see if
People see me and they go, "Ah! Help! A big, stupid, stinky, smelly, ugly ogre! I'm so scared!" And they judge me before they even know me.
That was worth the wait, right? Everybody say yes. Wow, I got a lot of power with this microphone all of a sudden. Do you want me to play this last clip?
Yeah, you guys want to see the sketch? All right, let's do
Okay.
the sketch.
Yeah,
Everyone give it up for Peter Werts. And we're going to watch this sketch here.
So this is the Chris Farley Show SNL sketch, if I can get this to work. And one of the reasons I love this so much is just because, for two reasons actually. A, it illustrates just how nervous he would get. He's interviewing Paul McCartney, one of his favorite musicians of all time, but also because it shows how funny he can be, even when he's not smashing through walls and falling into tables and stuff.
Wait, you remember when you were with the Beatles and you were supposed to be dead and
there's all these clues that, like, he'd play some song backwards and it'd say, like, Paul is dead, and everyone thought that you were dead or something.
Yeah.
That was a hoax, right?
Yeah, I wasn't really dead.
Right. You remember Beatlemania? Where those four guys, they dressed, I went on stage and they looked like you, and then they played Beatles songs, and
Yeah, I heard about that.
that was awesome. Think we've got time for one more question. Remember when you were in the Beatles and you did that album Abbey Road, and at the very end of the song, it goes, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. You remember that?
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, Chris. In my experience, it is. I find the more you give, the more you get.
Well, that's it for this week's show. Thank you, Paul McCartney. Thank you for being one of the greatest a living legend, and a legend of rock and roll. And just thanks for being on the show. Thanks.
You did fine, Chris. It was good.
Really? Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks. Thank you. Remember when I was talking to you about the Terminator?
Yeah.
You should see that movie, because it's pretty cool. 'Cause at the end
Okay, so if you do want to learn more about Chris Farley, you can certainly talk to me. I've got a lot of stories that make it in there. Or there's the Chris Farley Show, lovely book that's available at the library, so you can check it out there. It's an awesome book. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right, guys. Well, it's that time again. We still haven't figured out how to end Nerd Night. So that's about as good as any. We'll see you next month.